Hey, and welcome back, guys. This is session number 41 of our exploration of the Gospel of Mark. And in this chapter, we're going to jump in and look at Jesus's teaching of a lesson that he uses a familiar item from the first century in. It's a powerful passage that really takes us all the way back to Genesis, actually. And it should actually lead to some introspection on your part and on my part as we go through it. So let's go ahead and dive right into that text. Why don't we? Mark chapter 12, verse 13 says, "And they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk." Now, let's look at these two groups here. We're going to look at the Pharisees and the Herodians. And I want to start with the Herodians. The Herodian dynasty was a dynasty of Jewish kings. And I want to put kings in quotation marks here because that's exactly what they were. They were quote unquote kings. They weren't really kings. They were client kings, which means they reported to the Roman rulers of that day. So the Jewish people saw them as puppet kings in their eyes. And Herodians were like a political party that aligned themselves with the Jewish kings and ultimately with the Roman Empire. So the Jews did not like the Herodians. As you can see, the name Herod there is in there. And you know, King Herod was a bad Jewish king who was in bed with the Roman authorities. Now, here's the interesting thing about these two groups. The Pharisees actually hated the Romans, and as a result, they hated the Herodians because they were faithful to Rome. But they recruited the Herodians to try to trap Jesus in his talk. Two enemies, right? Enemies actually working together to try to trap Jesus in his talk. Kind of crazy who people will align themselves with to achieve a goal that is selfish and has some implications for each party. Both of them had a common enemy in Jesus, and they wanted to see how they might be able to trap him in his talk. Let's look at what happens next. "And they came to him and said to him, 'Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion.'" That's true about Jesus, right? "For you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful?" Here's their question. "Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" That's what we want to look at here, that question. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Now, what does it mean to be lawful? Remember, there's a mixed group here asking Jesus this question. So why is this question a difficult one to answer in light of this mixed group? What if Jesus says it isn't lawful to pay taxes? Well, he could be held liable for treason because the Herodians would hate that because that means that he is anti-government and they are the governmental body. Now, what if he says it is lawful? Well, that would mean that he respects man's law over God's law, and the Pharisees would call him a sellout. So Jesus is in a lose-lose situation here on its face, but he's going to do something crazy. Something interesting that will turn it back on them. Now, let me be clear here. This taxes is different from the temple tax. Remember, Jesus sent Peter fishing when Jewish folks came and asked if Jesus paid the temple tax. The temple tax was a tax for the Jewish community. This is taxes to Caesar. This is essentially the IRS of Judea. Got to pay those taxes come April, or you are in big trouble, right? At least in the United States. So here's what happens. "But knowing their hypocrisy," we talked about this word, the two-facedness of them, "he said to them, 'Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it.'" Now, we already talked about hypocrisy, I believe, in the previous session, but it actually literally means two-faced. So you got one face in public, one face in private. Those are faces. I guess I need to put smiley faces on to make sure you know that they're faces, right? So why did he use this? Because when he asked for a coin, guess who bought him the coin? The same folks who wanted to trap him and thought paying taxes were evil. So he's pointing out their hypocrisy using this coin. Now, a denarius was equal to 1 day's labor or wages. So it was 1 day's worth of work. It was an 8-hour workday in our context. It was a full day's worth of work. Now, remember when the disciples got mad at the lady who was wasting ointment on Jesus as she anointed him? What did they say? That could have been sold for 300 denarii, right? Denarii. That's 300 days worth of work. That's essentially 1 year's worth of salary of oil. So no wonder they were upset. She was giving up 1 year's worth of salary on Jesus and anointing him. You can see that in Mark 14:5. Okay. So denarius is actually worth 1 day's wages. So he asked them to bring him that denarius, right? And then what happens next here? And they bought it. And he said to them, whose likeness and inscription is on it? They said to him, Caesar's. Now let's look at this phrase here and then that word Caesar's. What does this word likeness mean? What does that mean? The Greek word for likeness is actually icon, right? It's where we get the English word icon, right? In our culture, an icon means a person or thing that represents someone else. So Jesus asked them, whose icon is on here? And they said to him, Caesar. Now, who is Caesar? Well, the original Caesar is Julius Caesar. We've heard about him, right? We heard about him getting stabbed in the back by his friends. But because he was such a respected ruler in the Roman Empire, every emperor after him took on the title of Caesar. So the Caesar in Jesus's day, at least at the time of this coin, was Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius. So he took the title of Caesar in Jesus's day. And his predecessor, we know him too, Augustus Caesar, right? Remember when it came time for Mary and Joseph to go to their hometown of Bethlehem? He's the one who called for the census for them to actually go to Bethlehem to be counted. So Caesar represented the ruling authority at the time. Let me show you a denarius so you can see an image of it. For Jews, the image on the coin, any coin, was actually seen as blasphemous. Do you know why it would be seen as blasphemous? Well, one side had the image of the emperor. So this would be the emperor right here, right? Tiberius Caesar, Augustus. And then the other side, it would have some type of propaganda. So it would show this scene of him being glorified. See this throne? You see him holding the scepter here. So it has some propaganda saying that he is king, right? So Jesus uses this coin to answer their question, but it also points to something greater. But I want to tell you what it says on the coin. It says Divus et Pontifex Maximus. And essentially it means God and high priest. So the emperor is holding himself out as both God and high priest in this culture, which is something that's going to be very interesting as we get later in this text. And then Jesus said to them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. Look at these two phrases, okay? Why is this last phrase important? Why is this last phrase important? Rendering to God the things that are God. Now, a lot of people translate this text by saying, okay, pay your taxes. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, right? So you'll hear some sermons about this in April, maybe, talking about paying the IRS and paying your taxes, right? And then it says, pay your taxes, pay your tithes, That's what this text is about. Taxes and tithes. Not so fast. Not so fast, right? It really isn't about the coin at all. This passage is not about the coin. It's about where Jesus wanted to take these folks all along. He wanted to go a little bit further back in history. Remember the question, whose likeness or image is on the coin? Let's read another text here right quick to help give us some context. Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, you see image again, he created him, male and female, he created them. This is where Jesus wanted to take them, right? Adam and Eve being formed in the beginning in God's image and likeness. Jesus here is saying, yes, the coin bears the image of Caesar, but you bear a more important image, people. Like you give Caesar back what is his, I want you as my image bearers to give yourself back to me. Render to God what is God's. Romans chapter 12, verse 1 says this, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. He's saying, I want you to give that image back to me in everything that you do. Render to God what is God's. So here's the takeaway I want us to think about as we end this session. Here's the one idea I want you to carry away with you, and that is this. Image bearers always point to the original. Image bearers always point to the original. For the coin, the image bearer always pointed to the king. The coin was set up in such a way so that either way you flipped it, it pointed to the reign of that king. And I think for believers, it's not about the coin. It's about being image bearers who point people to the original king. No matter how much life circumstances flip you, people always land on the person who was created in the image of God and created to bring God glory. So here's the question for us, okay? How have you been flipped lately? Flipped by relationships, by finances, by jobs, by circumstances beyond your control. More important than that, though, where did you land? What did people see when you landed? Did you point them to the king? Did it point them to God's reign in your life? Here's what you should know. Here's what you should know. You are an image bearer. But those words carry weight. God expects others who encounter us to find their way to him. How are you and I, as image bearers of Jesus, pointing everyone that we encounter right back to him? One more point of illustration here. I think the same thing is true of our children, right? This is a picture of my wife and my daughter on the left and right, and me and my son. And I would say that these two are image bearers of their mother and father. They always should point to the original, though, right? And it's just not, but they always should point back to the original. It's not just the way they smile and the way they look. I think it's the way that they interact with the world around them. So as a parent, and even if you don't have children, as someone who influences children, you're responsible to shape that in them, to shape them pointing back to the one whose image they bear. And I think we can do that in several ways. One, by modeling godliness in private and in public. Two, by teaching them God's redemptive story very early in their lives. Spend time with them teaching that. And then three, showing them how to treat others in relationships and how they should be expected to be treated in those relationships as image bearers. I think as parents, as someone who influences children, it's all of our responsibilities to point them back to the original. All right, guys, that's been session number 41. Hopefully that was helpful for you. I love this passage. I love what Jesus is getting at here, but you have to understand the context in the culture and the history and the biblical context in order to get at exactly what he's saying. And that's what we do in the Seminary Toolbox. See you guys next go round in episode. See you guys next go round in session number 42. Can't wait. Looking forward to it. See you then. Grace and peace to you all.